So if anybody has questions, I'm sure that she will be very open to folks asking questions during the session. But also, you know, if you want to put them in the chat, I'm happy to sort of navigate those for Amanda. So I will pass it over to her, and thank you all for doing this quick little introduction. It's nice to see the big range of folks. I'm in Raleigh, so I saw there was a lot of Raleigh people here over at Interact and at Raleigh PD, so it's lovely to see you. All right, Amanda, it's all you.
Have a phone call coming in right at this very second. Oh, goodness. Here you go, 1 second. Okay. Hey, everybody. My name is Amanda Overman. I am the CODIS State Administrator as well as the Forensic Scientist Supervisor here in the Forensic Biology section in Raleigh. I've been at the lab for about 17.5 years. Have done everything from DNA databasing to casework, and then all things CODIS related as well. So excited today to get to talk to you guys about CODIS, which is probably one of my favorite topics. I hope that some of you guys have had CODIS hits and have been able to experience the excitement that comes along with those. So with that, we will get started. And as Juliet said, if you have any questions, this is really informal. It's a lunch and learn. So if you have any questions as we're going along, I'm more than happy to stop and answer those. All right.
Amanda, we can't hear you. I think you muted.
I must have, I don't know how I did that. Sorry. Okay. So our objectives, I'll start over again. Did you hear my introduction, Juliet?
Yes, we heard your introduction. Yep.
I don't know how I muted myself.
Oh, I got you. We'll figure it out.
Cool. So we're going to talk about the State Crime Lab in general. We'll talk about the Sexual Assault Kit Testing Initiative in North Carolina. We can talk briefly about the DNA testing procedures performed at the Crime Lab. I won't get too sciencey on you guys. We'll just kind of go over that briefly. We can talk about some common DNA lab results and their meanings because we speak a completely different language here in the lab. We'll talk about CODIS and its role in your investigations, and then if we have time, we'll talk about some DNA topics of interest as well. So the State Crime Lab overview. We have 3 different laboratories as a part of our laboratory system. The first and main lab is here in Raleigh. That's a full service lab that offers all of the different disciplines of forensic science. We also have a triad regional lab in Greensboro, as well as a Western regional lab in Edneyville, North Carolina. So some of those laboratories, there are different services. A more reduced service load at Triad and Region and Western. Are you hearing? Are you guys hearing a?
Yeah, I took them off. Some people are forgetting to mute themselves. So
okay,
I got you.
If everyone can mute, that will be great. Thank you. So the two laboratories that do DNA testing are the Raleigh lab as well as the Western lab in Edneyville. So our forensic biology section, we have 1 manager, 1 technician, and 24 caseworking scientists in Raleigh, which encompasses 4 supervisors, which we don't get to do much casework, unfortunately. And then Western has 8 caseworking scientist positions and 1 supervisor out there. And that serves the whole state of North Carolina. So we'll talk now a little bit about sexual assault testing in North Carolina. So as many of you, or hopefully all of you are aware at this point, the kits that were on agency shelves had to be inventoried by January 1st of 2018. Those initial efforts identified approximately 15,000 kits that had not been tested. And there has been money appropriated for the outsourced testing of these kits. there are different grants that are available, and those have been applied for, and we are working with the different agencies, especially SAK, to get that money. So in case you guys have not read the Survivor Act, it was House Bill 29 and it has been passed. That is something that is a good resource for you guys. I would suggest that everybody in your agency reads over that House Bill 29 or the Survivor Act to make sure that you guys are meeting the legislative mandates that are outlined in that law. So the sexual assault kits that were collected on or before January 1st of 2018 are the cases that are actually being outsourced. Those are considered the older cases. And then anything with an offense date after January 1st of 2018 is submitted to the crime lab for testing here. There's an email address that I'm going to say about 1 million times coming up, which is sak@ncdoj.gov. If you have any sexual assault kits, that is the email that you should coordinate with to get those submitted into the laboratory and for outsourcing. As of August of 2020, the current forensic biology turnaround time is about 190 days. That's for all cases, not just a sexual assault kit. Our sexual assault kit inventory of current cases that we had at the lab at that point was 1,457. Our total forensic biology cases was about 2,400. And then the oldest untested kit was December of 2019. These numbers have probably changed some recently, but that was kind of an overview that we would like to give. As far as the outsourced kits that have been screened, as of August of 2020, there are about 6,300 cases that have been looked at and screened for testing. The completed kits by the vendor was about 486 cases, and there have been CODIS hits in approximately 40% of those cases. So we've had about 203 CODIS hits as of August of 2020. So just some helpful hints with the SAK program that we have gotten over time with dealing with these types of cases. We do require a supplemental submission form for every sexual assault kit that is outsourced or tested in-house. This is in addition to the request for examination. Basically, it has just a series of questions. We do need that information filled out. Specifically, the very first part of the form discusses whether or not a crime was committed. That is important.
Well, maybe we will just sit and watch it.
We do have to know that information.
So weird.
If the date of offense is on or before January 1st of 2018, please fill out Part B on page 2. It's important for these forms to be filled out as completely and accurately as possible. As I said before, we're not asking for it unless we need it. So that's why it's on there. This is an example of what the form looks like. You'll have all of these numbers. So if you have a STEMS number, which you should for your sexual assault cases, that will be filled out here. And then this was that portion I was talking about regarding whether or not a crime occurred or not. And then these additional questions. If the case will be going for outsourcing, we also need a Part B filled out as well. And then this is the Part B. It looks a lot like the RFLE, but this is what will be sent to the vendor laboratory for their processing. Some additional helpful hints. There will be delays in shipping and testing results, just due to the fact that we're trying to coordinate with multiple different agencies across the state. We have to coordinate with how much funding we have, and then how many cases the vendor lab can take at a time. So if you send in your forms for evaluation and it takes a little while for us to get back to you, that's why we're trying to process this from across the state. So if you encounter any of these following situations, the email address is provided where your answers can can be provided to you. If your testing is completed and you're not receiving results or your evidence back within 3 months, please send an email. If you're having any issues with the vendor lab at all, any problems, if you have any questions about the reports that you received from the vendor related to the outsourcing process. And if you shipped your cases, but those are missing, you'll get a manifest when you ship those off. If there are any cases that are missing, let us know that as well. And please provide your agency number. So basically, like I said before, this email address is very important. If you have any questions about submitting sexual assault kits, please email that sak@ncdoj.gov, and you can get information on pretty much anything that you may have related to sexual assaults. Any questions so far? I don't think so. Okay, we'll keep going. So we'll talk a little bit about DNA testing at the crime lab, just so you guys can have an idea of what we do here. We will work cases where a suspect claimed consent, and we will work non-suspect cases. So those are some differences from the past that we want to make sure everyone understands that information. The kit should be collected within 5 days of the assault. Again, that has been expanded out just due to the fact that our technology is a lot more sensitive at this point than it used to be in the past. So what happens to your evidence in the forensic biology section? This is the garb we have. We dress up in our lab coats, gloves, all the PPE. We wore a mask before it was actually required for COVID, so we were pretty used to it. And we have our hair nets to prevent any kind of contamination of the evidence. So what can our testing answer? What can we tell you? We can tell you if a biological body fluid is present. Specifically, we are looking at blood and semen. If so, what kind? Blood or semen. DNA testing can answer, is a DNA profile present? Is it from a male or a female? Is it an unknown profile, or is it consistent with the reference profile? And can the unknown profile be entered into CODIS to develop a suspect or link cases together? Although DNA is great, we do have our limitations as well. We can't tell you when the DNA evidence was deposited on a piece of evidence. We can't tell you how it got onto an item. We can't tell you if it was a consensual act or not. And we can't tell you the race of the DNA profile. So as great as DNA is, there are definitely limitations. So for our body fluid identification process, essentially what we want to do, obviously if you get a large piece of evidence in, we want to narrow down the areas where a body fluid may be present. The body fluid is rich in DNA, so we're kind of targeting those specific areas. We're going to look at blood and semen. For our presumptive test for blood, we use Kastle-Meyer, and then our confirmatory test is an RSID blood test. It's kind of like a pregnancy test. You can see in these pictures here. And then for semen, we will do acid phosphatase as well as a microscopic examination looking for sperm, which they have a distinct look to them. You can see here in this picture. And then we do a confirmatory test of RSID semen in those cases. So our types of DNA testing, we actually do 2 different types of testing here at the crime lab. The main DNA that we're looking at is called nuclear or autosomal DNA. This is kind of the regular DNA that you think about. It's found in the nucleus of a cell. And in particular, we're looking at short segments of DNA called STRs, or short tandem repeats. And those are just specific areas of DNA that are repeated a certain number of times depending on the individual. Specifically, we're looking at 27 areas of the DNA, and half of that DNA is from your mom and half is from your dad. So essentially, we're going to have a set of numbers. Half of those numbers will be from your mom and half from your dad. We also do YSTR testing. This is a newer type of testing that we do here. That is paternally inherited DNA. So that would be the same along the paternal line. So grandfather, son, grandson would all have the same YSTR DNA. It's not as distinctive as the short tandem repeat DNA, but it can be helpful in a case, especially like a sexual assault, where you're going to have a large amount of female DNA present. We can zero in on that male DNA on the Y chromosome using YSTR testing. It is not searchable in CODIS, so for this type of testing, we have to have a suspect standard to compare to. That is another limitation of the YSTR testing. Again, it can be helpful though in specific cases, so that is something that we offer as well. Any questions about that so far? I'm not seeing anything, so we'll just keep going. So our DNA analysis is a multi-step process. We extract the DNA or remove it from the cells. We then quantitate it to determine how much we have to work with. With a forensic sample, you can imagine we may have a ton of DNA, or we might have just a little bit. Just depends on the sample. So we want to kind of figure out what our starting point is. Next, we're going to do an amplification process where we select those specific areas of DNA that we're looking at. We make millions and millions of copies for the next step, which is a capillary electrophoresis. That's a separation of the DNA based on its size. We basically put the DNA into an instrument, which then produces a genetic profile. The profile is essentially a set of numbers. Those numbers represent those DNA fragments. So we'll compare one set of numbers from the unknown items of evidence to a set of numbers from the known standards, and then determine whether or not they're the same or whether they match or they're different. So we're going to look at those two, make the comparisons. If you have a single source sample, which means that that's DNA from one person, we can do a side-by-side comparison. The numbers are exactly the same, and we can say it's a match. Unfortunately, with forensic samples, a lot of times we can have mixtures, which are a little bit more complicated, but we have tools available to help us out with interpretation of those kinds of samples as well. So we'll determine whether or not an individual can be included or excluded as a contributor. And then we do a statistical analysis as well. I'm not going to get into the statistics because you know, I know it's before lunch, but that will definitely put you to sleep. We're not mathematicians, but we do basically give a weight to that match. We tell you how common or how common or rare that profile is in a population to determine basically, is it likely that another person could have contributed that sample? So if the case is outsourced, you'll get a report from the vendor lab that if it qualifies for entry into CODIS, you'll get an additional report letting you know which profiles we did upload. If your case is worked by the Raleigh Crime Lab or Western, you'll receive a report issued by us that's available to you through the FA system or Forensic Advantage. And then at any point, if there's a CODIS hit in the case, there will be an additional report to let you guys know that. Any questions so far about the process in general? Not seeing anything? Okay, we'll keep going. So this is the portion where we're going to talk a little bit about what our reports mean. Like I said, we have a tendency to speak a completely different language, and we change that language at times, so it's hard to keep up sometimes. But what I'm going to give you today is kind of an overview of the more common terms that you're going to see. So a match is the DNA profile from the evidence is the same as the DNA profile from the standard that's submitted. That's our simplest type of analysis or simplest type of result that we obtain. Consistent with means that at each of the areas that we test, the information is the same, but there may be either some areas that don't have results, so we can't make a comparison at every area, but what we do have is the same. Cannot be excluded. That would be a situation where we have a mixture. There are multiple individuals in that profile, and one of the standards when we make that comparison, the information is the same and it's there, so that individual can't be excluded as a contributor to that sample. Included as a contributor, no unexplainable differences between the DNA profile from the evidence and the DNA profile from the standard submitted. So here we have a little visual that will help us hopefully see those different types of results. So match, obviously, we have a blue circle with 27 and a blue circle with 27. They're the same. Easy peasy. Consistent with, here's our evidence profile. We're missing this little portion here, but it's very similar to basically everything that we can see there is the same, even though there is a portion missing here. So we're going to call that consistent with. And then cannot be excluded. This will be your mixture. These two squares here represent the mixture. You can see here, there's a victim's profile and then the suspect's profile, and those are included or cannot be excluded from that mixture. So a mixture of two contributors. The DNA profile is interpreted as containing DNA from two individuals. Obviously, with forensic samples, we can have mixtures of 2, we can have mixtures of 3, mixtures of 4. We don't interpret anything above that, but you can have a mixture of, it seems like 1 million people sometimes. So it varies. A lot of times, especially with a rape case, we're going to see a mixture of 2 contributors pretty often. A major contributor profile, that would be a profile that's there in a higher concentration than another profile in a mixture. And then also in certain situations, if we have an intimate sample, we can assume that the victim's profile would be there. So that would be a situation like a vaginal swab. We can assume that the victim's profile would be on her own vaginal swab. Therefore, we can subtract out her DNA information, and what's left over should be the DNA information from the person who potentially committed that crime. So excluded as a contributor, when the profile from the evidence is compared to the profile from the standard, they're not the same. Inconclusive due to complexity and or insufficient quality of recovered DNA. That's a mouthful. So that would be a situation where our DNA just doesn't meet a certain threshold. We aren't able to make any conclusions on that DNA. There's just not enough there. Or on the other hand, there may be too much there. That would be that mixture of 1 million people that we're seeing, which is an exaggeration. Hopefully we don't see 1 million, but quite a few. You can get a DNA profile that, you know, basically it looks like everyone shared that ski mask, and that was the one that everyone used to commit their robberies. So that would be a situation where prior to doing any kind of comparison, we're going to make that decision. We're going to decide whether the profile is good enough for us to make any comparisons to. And if it is not, then we would use this statement.
Amanda, I think I know the answer, but just had a question about if you'll be willing to share your slides with me that I could send to folks.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay,
not
great.
A problem at all.
Thank you.
So here's another one of those visuals. This is pretty simplified, but you know, this is what we're saying. If you have your evidence profile here, which is your yellow circle, it definitely doesn't match this blue rectangle. So that would be does not equal or does not match. So this is kind of my disclaimer slide. Depending on where your case was worked and when it was worked. So as I said before, we change our wording. So if you have an older lab report, the wording may be different than what you would see on a current lab report, depending on whether or not it's the vendor or the crime lab. In general, the statements are pretty similar, but the wording may be slightly different. So that's just a warning. These are just examples of some of the most common ones. They're not the only ones that you may see. So unless we have a known standard for comparison, we're not going to report a statistic. So especially for sexual assault cases that are sent to the vendor lab, most of those don't have any known standards submitted with them. So there's not going to be any kind of statistical portion on those. So if you have any questions about lab reports that come from the crime lab, you can call that main number there, which is 919-582-8860. And we can get you in touch with the analyst who issued that report. And we are more than happy to do our very best to attempt to explain these results at any point. And then if you have any questions about any lab reports you get from a vendor lab, those would go to the SAK at ncdoj.gov, and then we can get you that information there. Any questions? I know we kind of went through that fast. Any questions about the reporting? And if you have them later, you can definitely get in touch with us. Like I said, we're happy to answer any. All right. So now I will talk a little bit about CODIS and what it can do in your investigations. I'm hoping, like I said, I hope that some of you guys have had the experience of getting a CODIS hit and it has helped out with your cases. That is our goal. So CODIS is the Combined DNA Index System. It's a database that is maintained by the FBI. It allows those DNA profiles from evidence to be compared to known samples from convicted offenders as well as arrestees, as well as to other cases. So we can tie cases to known samples as well as to each other. So like I said before, with those DNA profiles, essentially they're just a set of numbers, which is what allows us to enter these profiles into a database. So currently there are over 190 labs across the U.S. that participate in CODIS. So it includes all 50 states. And then as of June of 2020, there are over 19 million DNA profiles routinely searched at the national database, which is really amazing. And I can tell you, just being a part of the history of CODIS, we get more hits now. Back probably 10 years ago, we may get like 200 hits a month. 200 hits a year. We're getting, close to 100, 150 hits a month now, which just shows you as a database grows, there's a greater potential that you're going to get those matches and those hits. Our database is comprised of over 350,000 DNA profiles. So why is CODIS helpful? It allows us to tie serial crimes together. It allows us to share information and share investigative leads. So with CODIS, there are certain levels. So we have a national level, that's the main level. That's all of the labs that are tied together across the country, and that's maintained by the FBI. There's also a state database level, which is what the North Carolina Crime Lab in Raleigh is. That's our ESTIS. ESTIS includes samples from evidence as well as all of the samples from our DNA database unit, which are the known samples from convicted offenders and arrestees. We also have local labs that feed into the system. So for North Carolina, our local labs are the Western Regional Lab as well as the Charlotte-Mecklenburg PD Lab. So what samples are eligible for CODIS? There are certain quality requirements based on the level. So we can't just put a very, partial profile in. It has to meet certain guidelines for completeness to go in. And then forensic samples with documentation of how they are related to the crime and how they are attributable to a putative perpetrator. That's an FBI term that they use. But basically, we want to be able to tie anything that we put into CODIS to a crime. We can get DNA from a lot of different sources, but it needs to be DNA from a source that is related to a crime and not just some trash on the side of the road or something like that. In instances of a sexual assault case, if there are any consent partners that the victim has, we will make a request to get those elimination standards. They're considered elimination standards. They aren't put into any kind of database, but basically we want to make sure that any DNA profile that we develop is not her consent partner, that it is truly an unknown person, because we don't want to put anyone who did not commit a crime into CODIS. So you will get requests for those in your cases if it's applicable. In addition, we have arrestee and convicted offender samples that are based on the state laws. Some samples that are not allowed at INDIS are the victim. The exception would be if that person is entered as a missing person or unidentified human remains. Those elimination standards that we just talked about from the consent partner, those are not entered in. If a person is considered a person of interest, if they do not rise to the level of suspect, obviously that's going to be dependent on your agency's definition of that. But if you classify them as a person of interest on your request for examination, those profiles are not going to go in. It has to rise to the level of suspect. And then suspect standards are only allowed at the state level. They do not go to INDIS. Okay. So we'll just talk a little bit about what's at INDIS. We have those arrestees, convicted offender samples, forensic mixtures, partial unknowns, all your forensic samples, as well as missing person and unidentified person. And then at the state level, we have arrestees, convicted offenders, your forensic samples, suspects, missing persons and unidentified persons. And then at the local level, we have the forensic samples, suspects, and then missing persons and unidentified human remains. So basically, if the profile qualifies at the local level to go up to state, it will go to state. If it then qualifies to get uploaded to national, it'll move on to the next level. I'll actually go back. I'll talk really briefly about missing person and unidentified human remains as far as what those mean. So if you have an individual who is missing in your area and you have a known sample from that individual, whether it be a toothbrush, an intimate item, some form of clothing, and that can be considered a standard for that individual, we would enter that in as the missing person sample. That can be then searched in CODIS to try to match it to any unidentified individuals or remains that are in CODIS. So your unidentified human remains will be things like bones, pieces of individuals, anything that, or an individual who cannot identify themselves. Those are also considered unidentified human remains. So that's kind of a special category for those types of individuals. All right. So now you guys are going to get tested. We'll see if what you think about if these profiles are able to be entered into CODIS or not. So if you have a DNA profile developed from the suspected blood collected from a broken window, which would be your point of entry of this crime, of a home where there's been a breaking or entering that occurred, can we enter that DNA profile from that suspected blood? What do you guys think? You can put it in the chat. If anybody wants to unmute and yell it out at me, you can. Are we getting any? Let's see. Oh, I'm seeing
lots of yeses. Yeah.
Lots of yeses. Very good, guys. Absolutely, Susie, you are right. So that is a perfect example of an evidence sample that we had talked about. So that's yes. Next, you have a DNA profile, a male DNA profile developed from a swab collected from the victim's rape kit that does not match. In this case, we were able to get the elimination standard from her husband, and it doesn't match. Does that go in? Let's see. No, yes, no. Depends on scenario. Always depending on the scenario, yes. Lots of yeses. So you guys are right. So in this case, it is a yes. So this would be a situation where saying that we have the information that a rape did occur, which I didn't give you a lot of background. So we have that situation that a rape occurred. The victim said that she had had sex with her husband the night before, but we got his sample. We were able to eliminate him as being the donor of the sample. So that profile can go in. So that any male DNA there should be able to be attributed to that perpetrator. So it can go in. Now, there are instances where we're not able to get that elimination standard. There have been instances where your victim doesn't know the person that she had consensual sex with. If it's impossible to get the sample, like we've had examples of individuals, consensual partners who just got deployed for 3 years or something to that effect. If it's impossible to get that elimination standard, we can still enter those profiles into CODIS. We just have to make that attempt. We have to make a good faith effort. And it happens sometimes. We do enter those profiles in, and sometimes we get hits to individuals who the victim says, that was my boyfriend, and it happens to be that her boyfriend was a convicted offender or an arrestee. At that point, we do take those profiles out because they aren't related to a crime. So that's an important point to remember as well. All right, moving along. If we have a DNA profile from the suspect's shirt that matches the victim, can that go in? Seeing lots of no's. Good, good, good. Very good, guys. So this is one of those situations that this is absolutely good for your case. Obviously, if the suspect says, I've never seen that person before, and we're able to find the victim's DNA profile on his shirt, that can be very helpful in your case. However, for CODIS purposes, it's not allowed in CODIS because that victim did not commit a crime. They are the innocent party in this, and so we would not enter that in. Good job. I try to trick you guys sometimes. All right, so the last one. What about a DNA profile from a cigarette butt from the side of the road? What do you guys think? No, I'm seeing no's. No, 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 no. No. Okay, so, there's a, unless it pertains to the case. Very good. So this one is tricky. This is a situation that it's a maybe. So this is where it's very important. I know we make you guys fill out a gazillion forms. We ask for all kinds of information. And for CODIS purposes, it really is important because for CODIS, the devil is in the details. We really have to know how a DNA profile relates to the crime. So in a situation like this, if you guys are just traveling down I-40 and pick up a cigarette butt, that's not going to do me any good. I can't put that into CODIS. But if you have a crime scene where your victim is found, the car door's open, your victim's laying there on the ground, they got shot, and you have a smoking cigarette butt right beside the body, you know that your victim didn't smoke, or you submit the victim standard and we can eliminate them from the cigarette butt. That would be a situation where we could potentially put that in and hopefully give you guys an investigative lead in the case. So it really just depends. And unfortunately with CODIS, a lot of times that is the answer. We have kind of some rules and some guidelines, but it's very case dependent. So I love details. They're very helpful for me in determining profiles for entry into CODIS. So you guys might get calls from analysts who need additional information. It's not because they're harassing you. It's more just so we can get those points answered in order to know if it can go into CODIS. Very good, guys. Any questions about that? I know eligibility can be kind of confusing sometimes, but you guys did really good. All right, so moving right along, we'll talk a little bit now about what happens when we get those matches in CODIS. It's a very exciting day. That's like one of my favorite parts of the day, to see when we get those hits. It's very cool. So the matches occur between the samples in the database. They can be in-state matches, so that would be a match from an evidence sample from one of our cases to one of our convicted offender or arrestees. That is actually the majority of types of hits that we get. And then we also have the out-of-state matches where either our case or our offender will hit to either an offender arrestee from another state or to another case from another state. So once the match has been evaluated and we determine that those two sets of numbers are indeed the same, we will initiate a confirmation process. It's a multi-step process. It involves several different units in the laboratory and quite a bit of work. Because basically any information that we provide you guys, we want to make sure it is accurate and good information. So, those searches happen at Estes and Indus on a daily basis, and we evaluate the matches by either the CODIS administrator or one of my assistants. And that initiation of the confirmation process occurs in the forensic biology section, and then we will let the DNA database know that we need that confirmation process. So what occurs? First, they're going to pull the original sample that was collected from the arrestee or an offender. They'll rerun that sample to make sure that what is in CODIS matches that second run. If there are any discrepancies, that information is not conveyed until we resolve any issues that occur. There's also a subject information assessment. Basically, we're going to ensure that the individual had a qualifying offense and was allowed to be in the database in the first place. In addition to that, we're going to determine whether or not that individual was incarcerated at the time that the offense occurred. So obviously, if you've had someone in prison serving a 30-year sentence and it's not possible for them to have committed that crime, we probably have to do some additional investigation, which thankfully that hasn't happened. but it's just one more check to make sure that what we're giving you is good information. And then in addition to that, there's a fingerprint confirmation. So when the samples are collected from the offenders and arrestees, there are a set of thumbprints that come along with those samples. Those thumbprints are then compared to what's in APHIS for that individual, again, to make sure that we have the correct information for the specific person. So once those processes are all completed, the database will let us know, and then we will issue a CODIS hit notification to you guys, letting you know that we've had either a hit to a convicted offender arrestee, we'll provide the name, or it's hit to another case. Let's see here. So our types of hits, offender hits are our most common hits. We also have arrestee hits. Investigative information, those would be 2 cases that are solved but not necessarily linked. Forensic hits are when you have an unsolved case that hits to a solved case. And then occasionally there are no matches. That would be a situation where CODIS basically didn't want to narrow things down so much, so they allow human intervention. We'll look at those 2 sets of numbers. If there are enough differences, we'll say that that's a no match. So we use the term hit and match a lot of times interchangeably, but technically a CODIS hit is a match that has been confirmed and aids in an investigation. So the hit is the final product, and the match is kind of the initial step. So the real strength in CODIS lies in solving those non-suspect cases, because obviously if you have one of those cases that's a real whodunit, this can provide you a name, which is pretty exciting. Those would be our convicted offender and arrestee hits. We also have the forensic hits, which are unsolved case to either a solved or an unsolved case. The majority of hits that we get these days are to sexual assaults and property crimes. That's just where our hits occur for the most part. And one hit can link multiple investigations that may not otherwise be associated, especially if you have obviously different jurisdictions. Individuals travel, they're not just going to stay within the PD jurisdiction. They may move throughout the county or even throughout the state. So we can help get you guys linked up so that you know that there's a potential that these cases are serial in nature and this individual has committed multiple crimes. So this is just an example of what the CODIS hit notification for our offender or arrestees looks like. It'll basically just describe what sample from your case was searched, and then we'll provide some identifying information as much as we have. So we'll give you the name, date of birth, social, SID, and FBI if we have it. And then this next part basically is kind of one of the key points to a CODIS hit. So it's only an investigational lead. This is not considered a direct comparison of evidence. It only gives you guys probable cause to get a standard from that individual. The DNA from convicted offenders and arrestees is not considered evidence. So therefore, this hit only gives that probable cause to get that suspect standard, which then has to be submitted, tested, and compared back to the evidence. The next paragraph here, we're talking about, I mentioned before that sometimes we'll get the hits to a consensual partner. You guys will provide the name to your victim and she'll say, wait a minute, that was my boyfriend. Turns out that individual did have a profile in CODIS. If at any point you determine that the person who's identified is not related to the crime, please let us know, and then we'll take that profile out of CODIS. And then this last part will have the information of the individual who worked your case, as well as my information for contact down there as well. This is an example of what those case-to-case hits look like. So basically, we'll provide the information for the other agency's contact so that you guys can communicate and share any information you may have, but to potentially solve these cases. Obviously, somebody may have a lead that the other person didn't have, And so we'll give you guys that information for that contact. Those CODIS hits are released in FA, so anyone in your agency who has FA, for anyone who doesn't know, is our LIM system. Basically, it keeps track of everything that occurs within the laboratory. So those reports are issued in FA. They go to the investigating officer as well as the sheriff or chief of police and the district attorney's office. Everyone has access to that information. And then there's also a letter that's been issued by the Attorney General that basically describes that we would like you guys to participate in this process. If you are able to follow up on these hits, we need you guys to do that. And that's part of the FA packet as well. And then we also send out a hard copy of that. So it's kind of an additional reminder that there was a CODIS hit in the case. Any questions about that so far? Not seeing anything. Okay, so like I said before, it's only going to give you guys probable cause to get that standard from the individual. If there is a suspect standard that you need to collect, we don't have to have anything fancy as long as you guys use sterile swabs. We don't have to have a suspect kit. All we need are the swabs. You know, the buccal swabs or cheek swabs are perfectly fine for us. We don't want you to use one of the offender or arrestee collection kits. Those are really cool. They have a really nice little dispenser or collector for the DNA. It's very fancy, but that's not what we would use in the DNA section for evidence purposes. So don't open one of those up. Plus, they're a lot more expensive than those swabs. So like I said before, those database samples are not considered evidence. There's no chain of custody associated with them, which is why that is the case. So just one thing that we have noticed is a trend. For the most part, we don't actually get those suspect standards in. And the more that I interact with you guys and get information, I think there are a lot of reasons why. We usually only get suspect standards submitted in about 30% of the cases that we issue the hit notifications for. So if at any point you determine that this investigation is not going to progress, or if the individual is already incarcerated, if it's a question of consent and the case is not going to be prosecuted, any of those reasons, and again, the consensual partner, let us know so that we can close it out. There is a push to follow up on these CODIS hits. So there's a good chance that someone at some point will be contacting your agency if you have outstanding CODIS hits to inquire as to whether or not you will be submitting the suspect standards, and if not, why. So there is also a requirement now as a part of the sexual assault initiative that we have to report any arrests that are made in relation to a CODIS hit. Let's see. So, as I said before, it's only going to give you probable cause. So, on the front end, as a part of your investigation, if you have the probable cause to get that suspect standard and you're able to, go ahead and get it. It's going to save a lot of time on the back end because in the end, you're only going to get probable cause anyway. So if you're able to get that suspect standard and submit it in with your evidence, we'll make that comparison, issue the report, and the case will be done. So we would request that if that is a possibility that you guys do that as well. So this is what I was talking about. As a part of the Survivor Act, law enforcement agencies are required to notify the lab within 15 days of any arrest or conviction that came as a result of a CODIS hit. So you may ask, how do you comply with this requirement? We have set up a portal, basically, that allows you to fill out a form. That survey is available at this link, and it will allow you to enter any information regarding, we will be submitting a standard. We won't be for X number of reasons. And like I said, there is going to be a push to follow up on these CODIS hits. So there's a good chance that at some point, someone from the lab will be making contact with your agency to try to follow up on the hits. This is just an example of what that form looks like. It's nothing too detailed, but basically just some general information on what has happened as a result of the CODIS hit. Any questions about anything that we've talked about so far? Not seeing anything. This is where I like having a live audience because I'm just looking at a camera. It's very weird. So success of CODIS. INDIS measures success by the number of investigations that have been aided. As of August of 2020, the State Crime Lab had over 6,400 CODIS hits and has aided in approximately 4,800 investigations in North Carolina. So I think that's pretty impressive. I feel like that's successful. Hopefully that has brought closure in some of those cases that may not have occurred otherwise. So now we'll just go quickly through some additional areas, topics of interest, just some newer types of things that we're offering here at the lab, and then we'll have time for questions if anybody has any. So we're going to talk about rapid DNA analysis as well as additional testing that is pretty recently offered here at the Crime Lab. This is the black box that is rapid DNA, a rapid DNA instrument. So rapid DNA is a term to describe the fully automated process of developing a DNA profile from a sample. There's no human intervention, there is no analysis, there's no interpretation, which sounds pretty cool. The problem is that currently that is only going to be approved for situations where it would be used in a booking station. The FBI sees a lot of value in a situation where you have a booking environment, someone gets arrested, you're able to run their DNA right then and there, upload that into CODIS without any kind of intervention. This is a known sample from that individual, no mixtures, very, very good quality sample. And then that's compared to any profiles that are at CODIS. Essentially, that's going to be a situation where this individual matches or you get a hit, then that will allow you to keep them in custody versus letting them go. That's kind of the vision that the FBI has for rapid DNA testing. Currently in North Carolina, as far as I know, there is no initiative to do this in our booking stations for our arrestees. At least we have not been notified if that is the case. There is a lot of discussion out there too about using these instruments for evidence profiles. As of right now, any sample that is generated or any profile that's generated from an item of evidence using this type of technology is not eligible for CODIS. So basically, if you generate a profile, you're going to have that standard available, and you'll have to have someone who can testify as to that comparison. It's not going to be able to be compared at CODIS. We won't test any samples that have gone through this type of instrument. There's potential for contamination. There are a lot of different issues, not to mention that it will use up a good amount of the samples. So that is another limitation and something to consider. If you have a limited amount of evidence and you feel like there's a really good chance that profile is going to need to be searched at CODIS, don't use a rapid instrument. If you are considering purchasing one of these types of instruments, please get in contact with us. We do need to work together to try to come up with the best plan for a pathway forward with these. But I will mention too, if you have a situation where you need a rush on a case, we offer that service as well. If there's a public safety threat, if you have a court date that's coming up, the Crime Lab does have a procedure in place where you can request a rush, and we will get those cases done as quickly as possible. At a minimum 30-day turnaround time. A lot of times it can be faster than that, just depending on the circumstances. So that is something that we offer as well. So we can be rapid too. So just some changes in the forensic biology section in the last few years that have helped a lot. We use a direct-to-DNA approach for processing sexual assault kits. that occurred in June of 2018. And basically it has allowed us to greatly increase our processing time for these types of kids. It's just a modification to how we're doing the testing. We're not necessarily doing the body fluid testing on the front end. It occurs a lot more on the back end, especially for kids. There is still body fluid testing in cases where there's bedding, more bulky items, but if it's a kit, it's going direct to DNA, and we're assuming that there is male DNA there. We are currently providing kinship testing. So we do paternity, maternity, kinship testing. That was implemented in spring of 2019. This is only for criminal cases. We're not doing any kind of child support cases or anything like that. It's valuable in situations where you may have a rape case and there's a child that is produced as a result of that rape. Is just one example. We're also using it for missing persons and unidentified human remains, as far as kinship of individuals and the likelihood that someone could be a parent of one of those people. So that is something that we offer here. We also are doing familial searching. That came about in fall of 2019. This is along the same lines of genetic genealogy, but it is very different. It's kind of the similar outcome, but just different testing. So this is a deliberate search of CODIS looking for parent or sibling relationships to the contributor of an evidence profile. So unlike regular CODIS hits where it's going to be a one-to-one, you can say that the evidence profile is consistent with coming from so-and-so. This would be a situation where it identifies potentially someone that individual is related to. There are certain criteria that have to be in place for that. For the most part, it would be a case where any kind of other leads have been exhausted. We've done this on a lot of older cases to try to identify any relatives that may be in the database. So one of the big differences with this versus genealogy, this is actually using CODIS. The genealogy uses different databases. It uses public databases. And this is using our technology or the STR technology, whereas genealogy is using SNPs or a different type of DNA. So those are some of the main differences. And the genealogy can go a lot further out. You know, that may be an identification of a cousin or someone like that, where it's further down the family line. So that's just some of the differences. We've also changed our type of analysis for the statistics that we provide. We're using likelihood ratios with probabilistic genotyping. It's pretty much the trend that the forensic community has gone to. It's a big difference for us. And it basically our lab reports are reported a lot differently. So if you have any questions about that, let us know and we can explain that as well.
Amanda, we do have a question.
Okay.
It says, I know, Yahoo, thank you. What might the familial searching or genealogy criteria entail?
So for our familial searching, it has to be a full profile. It has to be a male profile. And a lot of times it would be, like I said, it would be all leads have been exhausted. So this would be a case where, you know, we've searched it in CODIS. There's not been any hits. You know, you guys have done your part and investigated, and you just completely ran out of leads. A lot of the cases, I'll try to think of some of the most common ones are some older homicides. We've also had some older violent sexual assaults. So basically it has to be a felony. We can't do this on property crimes. It has to be a violent type of case. And, you know, basically at that point, if it meets those specific criteria, you guys just get in touch with us and say, hey, we think we have a case that may be a candidate for familial searching. At that point, we'll set up a meeting and do, you know, kind of an evaluation of what you have in your case, and we'll determine whether or not we can do it. I am not sure. So the genealogy, we aren't actually doing that here at the crime lab. There are resources out there. I think I saw John on this meeting. He may be able to talk a little bit about some initiatives that are out there as far as genealogy testing goes. It's a lot of the same types of cases. I will say with genealogy, a lot of times they have to have a larger amount of sample. Our technology is pretty sensitive, but with their technology, they sometimes have to have a greater amount of sample. But there are some resources out there. If you have specific questions about genealogy, you can let me know, and I can get you in touch with some folks that know a lot more about that, because we're not doing that here. But yeah, no problem.
And I would add that actually John and I just scheduled that he's going to be doing a forensic genealogy lunch and learn on April 13th. So I was just formalizing that, and I'm pulling together the registration. So I know that's something he cares very much about and would be happy to share with you all. John, did you want to say anything about it?
Can you say? Oh, thanks for the shout out, Amanda. No, yeah,
I always call you out, don't I?
I mean, I think forensic genealogy, it definitely is. It's a game changer. We used it twice in Fayetteville to solve our two most prolific unsolved serial rape cases. I mean, you guys keep up with the news. I'm sure you've heard about the Golden State Killer and a lot of other great cases. I'd always recommend try familial DNA testing at the crime lab first, because it's free and you may get quicker results, and then maybe consider doing the forensic genetic genealogy. But yeah, I'm going to be talking about it in depth a little bit next month, and but I'll be glad to talk to anybody about it. I know I've talked to some agencies in this state already recently, and they're interested. But yeah, feel free to reach out, and I'll be glad to talk to you guys offline.
Awesome, thanks, John. I think that's it. So that was a lot. If you guys have any questions, do we still have a little bit of time, Juliet? I'm not sure what time we were going.
Yeah, you have plenty of time. I actually have you scheduled till 1. So
okay.
Yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, let me know. And if you don't want to ask them here, my contact information is there. I'm a lot easier to get via email these days, but I'm happy to answer any questions, CODIS related, forensic biology. And if I don't know, I'll get you to the right person. So with that, do we have any questions so far? I'm not seeing anything.
Well, while folks are either thinking about a question or just getting ready to hang up, I just want to let you know, like I said, that we do have several additional lunch and learns coming up, and I will send out those links. I will also get these slides from Amanda and send you that, as well as an evaluation. But we have, I think, like 7 more lunch and learns coming up, but I'll just give you a preview. One is going to be Friday, March 26th, and it's entitled Sexual Assault Legislative Issues. It'll be done by NC CASA, the North Carolina Coalition Against Sexual Assault, their staff attorney, as well as their executive director. We also have Anatomy of Danger, how anatomy and physiology could improve strangulation responses and investigations. And that will be on Tuesday, March 30th. And then the other one that we have finalized is, John, like I mentioned, Justice Using Genealogy, and that will be on Tuesday, April 13th. So I will send you all these links to register, and also stay tuned for more. Thanks for being here. Looks like that's it, Amanda.
Thanks, guys, so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. We're here for you. If you have any questions. So there's a question about if the offenders in CJ Leads, if it says yes, there is a DNA profile on file, they should be in both state and national. They should be in both. That's a good question. So for any of you guys who don't know, there is a flag in CJ Leads that lets you know whether an individual has a profile on file in CODIS. So that is a field that you can search. Thank you guys so much. We're, like I said, we're here for any questions you have in the future. We certainly would like for you to get in touch with us. We're more than happy to help in any way we can. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Wonderful as always. Thanks for being here, everybody. And I'm recording it, and we'll put this up on our website once it's all downloaded and ready.